Good afternoon. Good. So I think we have a very interesting session, and Arvind has been working on this particular session for quite some time. We kept changing the title of the session, etc., etc. But what we are planning to do is very simple stuff today. See, my students find fault with me for one thing, because they call me an incorrigible optimist, which I am, no ifs and buts about it. But today, for a change, I'm going to be different. So I thought that, a discussion like this, unless you create a kind of provocative statement, you can't have some strong arguments. So the provocative statement I'm going to make today is very simple. Deep tech startup from India, an oxymoron. Let me repeat. Deep tech startup from India is an oxymoron. Okay? So I'm not necessarily agreeing with this, but I just want my panelists to disagree strongly and in the process get much more of an insight into the whole thing. And the template is very simple. So I'm going to request them to kind of speak for about 5-6 minutes, give their views. And then we might have a couple of discussion among ourselves and open it up for you to ask questions. But let me kind of tell you the 5 things which I think actually bothering me, bothering Arvind, bothering every one of us. And that is the reason why we think deep tech startup may not happen in India. So let me start with the first one. Okay, my friends in Bangalore will be very unhappy with me, but nonetheless, we are spoiled by the success of the IT services companies. Right? That is clearly the number one. Number two, my VC friends will again be upset with me. VC friends are impatient. So the 3 years is long for them, but 3 years is too short for us. So we need 7 years, 10 years, etc. Third one, academia, industry interaction, we are quite weak. So things are changing, but we need to go a long way. And I tried hard to get SEBI chairperson. She agreed, but she's quite busy. And she's current SEBI chief thinks very different. So I really wanted it. But I'm sure that we will follow it up with recommendations, and she would kind of come around to help us. I think government policies are anything but to help startups. So we have a few startup stuff, but I think we have a long, long way to go. And I think the irritants for the startups, many places you can't even bid. You're kind of priced out. Instead of pricing out, you are procedure out. Okay. Last but not the least, everyone is after quick bucks. And that is the whole country has this problem. Okay? When everybody is after quick bucks, and if you tell them 7 years, 10 years, etc., nobody seems to be interested. So this is the reality today. And how do we change? And Arvind and I, we have a broader need for doing this panel. One good thing is, TiE, for whatever reason, has got people's ears. Arvind, I'm speaking for you. Said, TiE managed to get people's ears all the way up to the Prime Minister. Okay, that's good. Yeah, it's good. Multiple, I actually met those guys today. So it is so nice to see. And also, SEBI chief really wants to help. Okay, so I think several people. But I also realized, Arvind, so you use this, today is a starting point, but, I'm sure we have people here, etc. Collectively, let us create a document and then push it. And, yeah. As they say, the horse may fly. Who knows? But, I think my incorrigible optimism comes back. So, okay. So I'm going to request each of the panelists to kind of introduce themselves in this kind of context. Of course, I will make some remarks before I hand over the mic to them. Of course, Professor Kumar has been heading the NSRCEL. You all know that NSRCEL started much earlier than anyone. The word entrepreneurship was invented in Bangalore. And of course, he has been teaching entrepreneurship. He is writing a book on entrepreneurship. So it's kind of great. And of course, Professor Natraj, very interestingly, distinguished academic, usual doc and postdoc, then went to industry and doing a lot of R&D in industry, back in academics and doing the country proud. So I think we couldn't have asked for any. So I think the two are the best institutes in the country, IISc and IIMB. And Amitabh is very special. So we kind of go back almost 30 plus years. And after doing a PhD and working with NASA, he decided to, and what I was telling, that that is the normal one where you actually look into another academic career, but he decided to be an entrepreneur. He invited me to his factory. I was there 2 weeks back. Amazing. And he does everything together. In a sense that he makes the battery, he buys the silicon, but he makes the PCBs, he writes the software, he assembles them, he has a nice assembly plant. He has actually gone to the great extent, the assembly plant is nice, that some of these young girls who are pony girls from Tamil Nadu are able to work happily. Because he has designed in such a way they don't have to lift much. So I think amazing. So we have amazing speakers, and let me start with Professor Kumar. You have the mic, sir? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Sadagopan.
Professor Mishra is here, so it's nice. Former Director of IIT Bombay. Yes. Yeah. Good. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor
so much.
Mishra.
Thank you.
So thank you, Professor Sadagopan. Maybe I'll pick up from the remark you made that a deep tech startup in India is an oxymoron. That's what you started with, right? Almost a decade ago, when as part of my teaching efforts, we were trying to nudge our MBA students to think about starting tech-based ventures, because in IIM, 80% of our students are engineers from some of the best universities and colleges in the country. So why can't we nudge them towards doing some technology-oriented businesses? So we formulated a program along with University of Michigan, and I called on Professor V Madhavan. I don't know whether you were there on that meeting. So we were a standalone management school. We didn't have a pipeline of technology-based inventions which could be converted into businesses. So I requested Professor V Madhavan, can you throw some ideas here so that my students and your students and University of Michigan students could come together and develop a go-to-market case for a technology invention that has happened in any of the labs. University of Michigan supplied their own set of ideas from the technology transfer office. I requested Professor V Madhavan. And he gave me a very, very insightful explanation as to how that would be very difficult. Because he said, as IISc, we call ourselves a science institution, right? We call our engineering department itself as engineering sciences, not as engineering department, right? So we start with science, there is engineering, there is technology, and then finally there is a product market. This pipeline is far too long. For the purpose which you are asking, I don't think we'll be able to put together a set of ideas which the students can work. Now you can imagine, even for an academic exercise, it's going to be so difficult. How much more difficult it will be really to create ventures on the ground which will go and attack the market starting from the science end. Okay, so to that extent, I think I could relate to what Professor Sadagopan is saying in terms of how difficult it is. The second point I want to make is that taking science and converting into a product market proposition goes through all these stages, nevertheless. But it is also in practice an exercise of digging a tunnel. And many of you will have this image. When the Channel Tunnel was dug, it was dug from the English coast, it was dug from the French coast. At one point in time, they just broke over and shook hands so that the tunnel was complete. So if you're talking about deep tech ventures, the inspiration for that venture could happen from either end. It could be the great scientist who's working on the lab who has come out with an invention, and that scientist, she could be looking at what ways can I sort of make it useful for society through products and market. That could be one starting point. On the other hand, you can also have people who are very entrenched into customer problems and then have a hunch, yes, a deep technology solution can probably solve this problem, but I don't have a clue as to what the technology could be. I'll have to dig other ways and then go and find out which technology or which science is going to solve my problem. So when we talk about deep tech ventures, depending upon where the inspiration comes from, the entire funding strategy also changes. So if we are going to start from the science end, going after return-seeking risk capital is not going to work forever, and the only thing that will remain probably is frustration because it's not happening. On the other hand, if you start from the market end and just because you have a reputation or you have a network, go and raise funds, then the problem is if you don't understand the technology, you are unlikely to deliver, okay? Both are problems. So to that extent, this whole challenge of funding deep technology is a very, very complex problem. Now, in my introductory note, I think you have floated this work by economist Marianne Mazzucato. She talks about the state funding it. And it is happening to a great extent in India. Okay, just before coming here, I ransacked the government websites. There are umpteen programs with so much of money running around. So in India, the problem of deep tech or funding deep tech is not one of a lack of intent or inadequate financing. I think it's a managerial problem. We are not able to orchestrate the ecosystem, which will take the science much, much closer to a convertible technology, which will find expression in product markets. And that part of the activity, we haven't got it right so far. In fact, Professor Sadagopan will second me, as institutions, we have been trying for almost the last couple of decades to develop a workable model of collaboration to jointly incubate and support ventures. We can only episodically quote a few examples of we did this or we did that, but we could never put together a program. That is one problem. The second is that the ecosystem also over a period of time, like Professor Sadagopan said, it's all about here and now. We want returns today. And I'm reminded of my high school football where we were 20, 30 students in a class. The PD master will come, divide us into two sides, throw the football in the beginning, in the middle and say, go and play football. And all 30 people will go towards the ball, running towards the ball. That's what is happening in the ecosystem also, right? The end game is also about, what kind of unicorns I create using deep tech. But there are so many intermediate stages, and we are not crafting our roles very clearly. And then say, I will do this, you will do this. Together, we can complement each other. The good news is there are a lot of players who are coming into the ecosystem today. You have not just the government agencies, you have institutions, you have got corporate organizations, you've got association, industry associations, special interest groups. But the question is, a model of orchestrating all this effort is still very elusive. We'll probably talk about that in the later part of the discussion. I'll just leave the initial remarks for this.
Thank you. Brilliant. I think you really kind of nailed it on the top. Thank you. So over to you, sir.
When I was trying to get my mind around what it is that the brief that you sent me, there were two things that I thought were rather important. The role of the government in enabling this, which you did address briefly. And the second bit was something about, I thought of an example to cite where there was a step change in the way things happen. Many of you may be familiar that there were two US senators, and the year is about 1978. And in the 70s, America was hammered by the Japanese companies, and they were going under, more or less, many of the companies. I mean, the old stalwarts like General Motors, which were in the top Fortune 100 company for the last whatever number of years since Fortune 100 got announced in the mid-50s, they were now beginning to get shaken up. So the Senate, these two senators from Indiana and Kansas were asked to find out or come back with reasons as to why United States had fallen so far behind in its ability to innovate. Whilst many of the fundamental discoveries, the Nobel Prizes, all of that was still United States was leading in terms of reducing science or engineering to practice. It was well behind the other countries. So they went around the country making various questions, and they came back and filed a report which the Senate then adopted and led to a change in the United States patent law. And that became what's now called the Bayh-Dole Act. The Bayh-Dole Act is actually incredibly simple. Up until 1979-80, all publicly funded inventions in the United States had to be licensed as a, what do they call? It could not have been an exclusive license. So it had to be a non-exclusive license. Now, what does that mean? Anybody who licensed a technology from, let us say, a university, the university could license the same technology to its competitor also, which meant that the source of competitive advantage of a technology was completely washed out. The day Bayh-Dole Act came into force, the total number of patents coming out of the American universities went up many orders of magnitude in the course of the next 10 years. The number of startups that got funded from American universities by their professors went up by a number of something approaching 20,000 startup companies in the course of the next 10 years. The way America went about the entire process of innovation and the way large corporations went to universities to access their technology changed fundamentally. Now I come back to the Indian scenario, and when I started working in this country back in 1980, and I started working for Hindustan Lever, the single largest source of competitive advantage in this country was your ability to get license to manufacture. I'll repeat this. The license to manufacture anything was the single source of greatest competitive advantage. One of the key decisions we used to take in Hindustan Lever those days was when to stop production. Not when to start, when to improve it, when to reduce prices, none of those things. The most important decision was when do I stop production? Because if we did not stop production, we had exceeded our license capacity, which meant the chief executive went behind bars. That was a punishment. Now in that scenario, please tell me, where is the incentive for innovation? In fact, the largest thing that operated here was a disincentive for innovation. Against that backdrop, now if you look back, the question about fundamentally important, what do you call it? Unicorns coming out of technology. My perspective on that is, it doesn't matter what it is that you do. I mean, let me pose a very simple thing. Many, many years ago, now it's about 40 years ago, Procter & Gamble came up with a toilet tissue paper. I mean, how much more mundane, banal can your product be than a toilet tissue paper, something you wipe your bottoms with? That technology was, very simply, if the normal diameter of a toilet tissue roll is 6 inches, this toilet tissue roll that Procter & Gamble came up with was about 2 inches thicker. It was about 8 inches. And what it basically did was, I won't go into the commercials, the market that the advertisement went into, but very simply what they had done was increase the surface area of the fibrils of cellulose on paper. By increasing the surface area of the fibers on the cellulose, it was massively more absorbent. Why? Because the capillary forces that operate between the extended fibrils simply took care of the water. And the total amount of paper that was used was exactly the same as the 6-inch rule, but it was 2 inches thicker. Now you ask me, therefore for me, there is nothing that you touch or feel that is more commonplace than even simple things like sabun or toothpaste or shampoos or whatever, which is what I have worked with, that does not have very deep technology. Earlier, the lady was talking about the Param computer, and one of the principal applications of that was in something called computational fluid dynamics. Now, the importance that computational fluid dynamics plays in the pumping of soap through a nozzle to create the secondary structures in soap is non-trivial. And we have spent a very large amount of time in my life worrying about the computational fluid dynamics of pumping a bar of sabun through a nozzle. So, for me, the application of high technology is everywhere. You can innovate in everything. This enables me to make soap with something like 30% less soap in a bar of soap than a conventional 80 TFM soap that you normally make. I didn't plan this discussion, but anyway, I'll end quickly, sir, unless you get worried.
I think it's just amazing. So I think insightful, very insightful. Please go ahead.
So the issue for me, the point that I want to make is that I gave you the sort of a scenario that we worked in up until the 90s. And post the liberalization, things have changed. And things are very different in India. I don't want to leave you with the scenario that the situation is as bad as it was. It's not. It's far better now than it was. But the issue still remains of reducing science to practice. Science, as it happens in our academic institutions, and it rightly so, is in isolation. It happens in, let us say, in silos. To convert that into practice requires a brush with a customer who is willing to pay. Whether the question is, what is that need that is needing to be done first, or what is the technology? Whether it's a bit of a chicken and the egg, and I won't get into that debate. Let's say we have an identified need for a particular application, and there is a technology that can fit. But to reduce the technology to practice, it has to go through reproducibility, manufacturability, scalability, cost, environmental use, product, the raw material availability. What do you do with the finished product? How do you treat the effluent? The whole shooting match has to be worried about. And it's all part of any manufacturing industry. If you don't worry about all of this, you haven't worried about anything. So now you begin. Now, any technology, and most organizations that have a product in the marketplace have gone to the limit of all of this. In other words, they have optimized raw materials, the energy costs, the effluent treatment, everything has been optimized, and here it is. Now, if you suddenly bring an innovation into that, it disrupts, and they climb straight back up, and now they have to come down the learning curve again. Most large industries are extremely resistant of this, trust me. In fact, they would sack an employee if he came up with a novelty. Why do they do it at all? If you look at the Fortune 100 companies of 1955, there is only one company that remains over this period of time in the top 25. That's ExxonMobil. All the other occupants of Fortune 100, circa 1955, are not there today. They're gone. The value destruction that happens in very large organizations to a very large extent is the need to sustain the present continuous. It is almost part of the DNA, because the people who built the organization have long since gone, and the people running it are maintainers. They're not necessarily the entrepreneurs who built the original concept. A lot of companies, and Johnson & Johnson is a particularly good example of how this works, they actually want to retain the soul of a startup in a large corporate organization with turnover in excess of $80 billion a year, and market capitalization, I don't know what it is, approaching $1 trillion, I think. Very large, very successful company. They've remained one of the top innovators for a very long time. And this is where I think the startup that was being mentioned is not just a startup for a startup's sake. Even large and medium enterprises need to incorporate the elements of a startup in terms of the passion, the risk-loving nature, and the can-do. I'll fix the problem. And they're always part of the solution, not part of the problem. That culture, if not incorporated in large organizations, I'm afraid large organizations have limited time. I'll stop there because I know I have taken a disproportionately large amount of time. My apologies.
No, but you also gave a disproportionately insightful views. I think it's wonderful. Thank you. I think it was so nice, kind of, because it is important. Because in fact, Madan Padki and I, we were just talking about half an hour back. I think what is important is to have the entrepreneurial mindset and not necessarily an entrepreneurship as a startup.
Yeah.
I think big, small, government, private, I think everywhere we need that entrepreneurial spirit. I think that is what you highlighted. Thank you. And then over to you, Amitabh. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Sadagopan, and thank you, gentlemen. Amazing. I think I find myself in really august company. It's not usual that I would find myself in the company of 3 professors on the same panel. I would like to focus only on the startup angle. So just a brief background. I did my PhD. I have worked for NASA, Hewlett-Packard, TCS, and Philips. You realize when you're working for a large corporate and I have called it Kida. You have something in your head, and it constantly forces you to change something. Matlab, jabardasti. You will try to keep on trying to, figure a new way, do something different, innovate, and you're a constant nuisance to your manager. No one likes you. They keep pushing you around from one department to the other. And then you finally quit, and then you move to another company, which, you hope that you're going to work. So back in 2000, I did my first startup. So I'm a software PhD. I did my first startup, which was acquired, then a second startup, which was acquired in 2011. So those have been software startups. Software startups are a lot easier. In those days, having a startup in India was not the easiest thing. But as long as you have a PC, everything's kosher. You can start doing something. I think 2011, after my startup was acquired, I think at that point, you do take a step back and you say that, okay, this time, perhaps I should, try to do something a little more, something that has a bigger aim. Most of the software startups that I've been through, and I look at others, sometimes I feel that the innovation, the level of innovation is not, very, very big. It's there. You might be creating a different business model. You might be making delta changes that help someone's, the way things are happening. But fundamental innovation, I strongly believe, cannot be without the hardware element in it. Just making, this again, I could be absolutely wrong, is my feeling. And hence, I started looking at this whole transportation and the energy business and the transportation e-mobility. This is back in 2011. At that point, 91% of India's electricity was coming from coal grids. But was also true that 1.6 million people were losing their lives every year due to poor air quality. 25% is attributed to road transport. That number today from 1.6 million has now become 2.4 million people. This is the latest Lancet report. 2.4 million people lose their lives every year in our country alone, every year, because of poor air quality, 25% attributed to road transport. And numerous studies on it. That means 5 to 6 lakh people lose their lives in our country because of road transport pollution. In context, when 1 lakh people lost their lives due to COVID, there was a national lockdown. 1 lakh, national lockdown, 5 to 6 lakhs every year have and will continue to. Reality. Something has to be done. Who will do it? I don't think the incumbents have interest. Just heard. Incumbents have very little interest. They've invested billions and billions of dollars. Look at the automobile industry, billions and billions of dollars in petrol, diesel, LPG, CNG infrastructure. They have very little interest in changing that status quo. Very, very little interest. And this is true for all large organizations. Look at Nokia, look at Hindustan Motors, anyone. There's so many of those that were market leaders. Startups do make a difference. Startups, will make change happen from the fringe. Change will never happen from the center. So you have to be some remote entity who just decides to create something which someone finds interesting and then comes forward. I think the learning that I had when we started looking at this space, obviously, where do you start? So you want to make an electric vehicle. You have aspirations of making a car, right? Because no one thinks of anything else. You think of electric vehicle, gaadi banayenge. You don't know where to start, right? There's motor, there's battery, and all this. You start digging deeper and deeper, and then you realize, the reason for creating an EV startup in India, for example, was that you realize that, EVs had been made in our country back in 1999. We had the Reva. Very good cars. Had been made. India was amongst the first few countries in the world that had a production-ready passenger electric vehicle. 1999 was Tesla. People were not even thinking about it, right? We had a production-ready car. The challenge always has been, like Professor mentioned, they can't compete in price and performance with an existing technology. And I'm saying price and performance, not either, right? So if you were to compare a Reva, for example, with a Maruti 800 or a Maruti Alto, it was 5 times more expensive, 1/5 the performance, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't sit on the AC and all kinds of constraints. I think that is the biggest difference between what we build and what we are supposed to build when you have an existing technology and you're doing it. Absolutely.
The only reason is I saw more Revas in London than in Bangalore about 20 years ago. And the reason for that is electric vehicles did not have to pay a parking fee. And you could park in central London. That was the incentive.
Right. So I think incentives globally have pushed new technology. The first and the most important thing is to be able to create them for the geography for which you are intending to make it for. You can't create something and say that, well, it doesn't work here, so I should go. I mean, Revas, for example, they sold 8,000 of them in 24 countries of the world. 8,000 vehicles, 24 countries of the world. Something's not right. 2010, that company had been acquired. 2010, the company had been acquired by Mahindra. They built 3 other vehicles. I love Chetan. He's a close friend. He's also an investor in my company. Right? So I'm not against anyone. But I'm just saying that you start to look at what exists and then you say, my technology has to be better than that. Look at the US. There was the Nissan Leaf, Chevy Bolt, Chevy Volt, very good electric vehicles. But they never made it. It took a Tesla to convince the world that EVs can be good and EVs can be better than any other thing made in the world. Can you imagine that the Tesla got the best automobile ever made award? Best automobile ever, not best EV ever made. Best automobile, because it's a different beast entirely. They're talking about ludicrous mode. In India, we are talking about under 25 kilometers an hour. Something is fundamentally wrong. If you're innovating, that innovation has to be better than what is produced by existing technologies in India. If you aim for that, trust me, there's no dearth of money. We have been funded since 2012 when we started our company. We started, about 11 years back. We have 29 global patents that have been granted to us. This is a new scam that's running in town, applied for. I have filed patents. 29 have been granted to us in the US, in Europe, and other geographies, right? If you are hell-bent upon it and you are passionate about the domain, I think there is still a lot of money floating around in India. Unfortunately, most of the VCs in India are people who made their money in software. So it's a natural tendency for them to fund software companies because they feel that they can add value to it. If you feel that I can't add value in a domain, then there's very little chance that so you have to look for them. I'm not saying it's easy. Even software companies, I mean, 93% of startups fail. This is a global figure. Funded startups, 93% will fail. Right? So a very large number are being made, of which a small percentage are getting funded. Unfortunately, hardware startups, deep tech startups are very few. I think it's just a starting stage. It's almost like we are back in the 1985s or the 89s or the early 90s when India was trying to create software startups. It was extremely difficult. I think we are at that edge right now. People are realizing that innovation is needed for our geography. Things just importing from other geographies, bringing them to India will not work. Our needs are different. I think users are also demanding things now. And there is money now that has come into the system. I do believe that a lot of innovation is happening. When you are part of that ecosystem, once you're in software, then you see only software. And I think industry, academia, I take special interest in doing that. Today we are working with 2 universities, the ISI Kolkata and IISc Bangalore. We are working with both at different levels. But we realized that there were specific things that we wanted. I think that model works the best. When you want specific things and you approach the university, you have to realize that a university will work on an academic program, right? So I can't expect an output in 3 weeks. So you work on problems that will take 6 months, 1 year, part of an academic cycle to create results. And if you have a problem like that, the best place to go is an academic institution and their professors and their students, and they really, really like to deliver. We've done that with 2 universities. We continue to work with them. It's worked really wonders. ISI Kolkata largely for data, and there's a lot of data innovations anyway, lots of things there. So I am an eternal optimist. I don't think I can compete with you, but yeah, as a startup guy, you have to be an optimist. You can't be a pessimist. So that's our journey, and I'm very bullish on software. I mean, and on startups and innovation in India. Very, very bullish.
No, but I think it's good that you managed to crack that, and I think it's simple. It's a very interesting observation you made, because a lot of times we make the generic statement, industry academia interaction is weak, because we somehow think that what works in US should work here. I think that is what we should stray away from. I think, as you said, we need a focus. I think once the focus is there, automatically things will keep happening. And okay, so Any quick questions? Yeah, I think already hands are up. That's good, very fast. Okay, so please.